My name is Juliet Merrifield. I'm part of the HKD Transition group in Sussex, Hurst, Pierpoint, Kemmer and Ditchling. And we are one of the groups that helped start the Central Sussex Climate Network in December 2019. So a couple of Zoom housekeeping things first. Hopefully everybody is muted, or if not, we will mute you so that there's not distraction of either phones going or conversations in the background or dogs barking or anything else. We are going to record it tonight. In fact, the recording should have started already because we're clashing with a number of parish council meetings and other meetings, and there's a number of people who wanted to be part of this evening and who asked if we could record it. So if you don't want to appear in the recording, please just turn your camera off. You already are muted. And we will have some speakers tonight and then time for questions and discussions and comments and thinking about where we go from here. So please use the chat box for any of those questions, comments, thoughts about what we could do next, resources that you know about that might connect with the topic for the evening. All of that would be very helpful to everybody else. So the Central Sussex Climate Network, it's a group of both individuals and community groups. And our agreed purpose is to join together to take action on the climate and ecological emergency. And we started just before COVID started, and so we've only had 2 face-to-face meetings, and we've had quite a few Zoom meetings. There is a very small group of us that organize the meetings. Chris and Scylla are on tonight. There's just 4 of us. So we'd like to hear from you if you've got any topics that you're interested in having future meetings about, and especially if you'd like to make things happen, if you'd like to get involved with planning a particular event or just to be thinking about how we might work together. So tonight's meeting follows up on one that we held last September, looking at how parish and town councils are addressing the climate and ecological emergencies. And it was clear in that discussion that there's a lot already going on to try to address this, and lots of nature recovery work at the local level. We heard stories about wildflower planting in cemeteries, about community orchards, about a seedling Sunday, about rain gardens, tree planting, and bat and bird boxes. So tonight we're following up that meeting and focusing on nature recovery networks, which is the practical ways that we can create and revive and join up natural habitats. We know that in our lifetimes, wild places in this country have become scarcer, smaller, and more isolated. And so our challenge is to reverse the trend as best we can in our own communities. So we've got 3 speakers tonight who I think will inspire and encourage us to do more and give us some ideas about what we can do and how we can work together. Henri Brocklebank and Rich Black are from the Sussex Wildlife Trust, and they'll talk about the Wilder Horsham project, which is a 5-year partnership between the Sussex Wildlife Trust and Horsham District Council. They're working with local communities and landowners to create nature recovery networks that reverse the decline in species and habitats and enrich the natural environment. And then Laurie Jackson from HKD Transition, who's a local ecologist, will talk about what nature recovery could look like at the local level, tapping into the interest and enthusiasm that already exists within the community and thinking about what can be done to enhance and extend habitats. And we'll finish with your comments and questions and discussion. So please remember to add things to the chat room as they occur to you as we go through. So thank you to everybody for coming. I'm looking forward to this evening, and I'm going to hand over now to either Henri or Rich. I don't know who's starting.
I'll be starting, but Rich is in charge of slides. So, Rich, are you able to share your screen? Okay. Well, thank you so much for inviting us along. I'm going to start off by giving a bit of background about the Wilder Horsham District project, and I'm going to start off with context. And it's context that, by the description that Juliet just gave of your group, context you'll be completely aware of, but context that an awful lot of people are not aware of. So I'll reiterate it because it's the background on which the Wilder Horsham District project sits. And as you can see from the logos on this screen, it's Sussex Wildlife Trust and Horsham District Council. We're committed to a 5-year project called Wilder Horsham District. This is our brand new logo. This is one of the first outings of our logo. The wise amongst you will see that's the shape of Horsham District, with healthy waterways, birds, dragonflies, a healthy, thriving natural environment. So we're looking to have a really, really fruitful 5 years in partnership with the District Council. This project is only a few months old, as Rich will explain, but it's exciting. Oh, was I on mute the whole time? Rich, can you change the slide, please?
No, it was just the last few seconds, Henri.
All right, okay. So, the global crisis in biodiversity is very, very real, and I probably don't need to overemphasize the seriousness of it. And we also know that the biodiversity crisis, or the ecological crisis, is absolutely interlinked with the climate crisis. So we've really stopped trying to tease the two apart, because we need nature's recovery in order to enable any form of climate resilience. So the decline in UK species, next slide please, is to such an extent that even the Daily Mail is starting to pick up on the declines of British species. And there's really, really shocking figures. But not only have we got an ecological crisis, but also it's how does that stand up when we've got a changing climate? Now, what happens with, let's say, an insect, a butterfly, a dragonfly, is what is happening is the climate is changing. The climate envelope, as it's called, of the species is changing. And so there is a general trend of species to just move northwards as the climate is changing. But of course, we need them to be able to move. And we know that within our landscapes, there are all sorts of blocks. And what we really need is networks for them to move. Can you have the next slide, please? And as you will all be aware, in Sussex, there is a staggering amount of development proposed. I mean, between 2010 and 2030 is kind of arbitrary figures. It's ongoing, the threats to development that we have, and the impacts of that development has on the landscape and our networks for nature is absolutely huge. Next slide, please. And also increasingly in the news, we hear about impacts of climate change, like, for example, flooding. And we appreciate more than ever how important our floodplains are for holding back water. And all those areas upstream are for slowing the flow of water. So our natural environment really has got something to contribute to our communities downstream. Next slide, please. And here in Sussex, and in particularly in mid-Sussex, we're really proud of the amount of woodland that we have. It's, we pride ourselves in being, I like to think of ourselves as the most wooded county in the UK, but Surrey seems to think it's more wooded than us. However, let's call ourselves the most wooded county in the UK. But we also know that the condition of our woodlands is absolutely terrible. We've got a real problem with invasive species. We've got a problem with a lack of management in woodlands, where the canopy gets thicker and thicker and light isn't able to go into those woodlands. So the biodiversity of some of our species-rich woodlands is decreasing. So next slide, please. And additionally, where have all our wetlands gone? So the stats around wetlands in the UK and in Sussex are like 96% loss in the last century of our wetlands. It's really, really staggering. And some of the real jewels in our crown in Sussex are nationally protected wetlands, but it's the small incidental wetlands around our landscape which we're losing. Really, the biodiversity is really struggling because there isn't a network of wetlands there. And next slide, please. And there's a similar story with our species-rich grasslands. And since the 1970s, there's been a 94% decrease in our species-rich grasslands in the UK. So we talk about the plight of pollinators. I think one of the reasons there is a plight in pollinators is we have lost such a significant resource to them in our species-rich grasslands. And it's often referred to as a shifting baseline of, you know, memories of a childhood in the 1960s will be very different to the memories of a grassland habitat in 2020. Next slide, please. And those sites, even the sites that we have that are protected with nature with the highest designations you can have, there are so many terrible things that are happening in there, be that invasive species or problems with water quality. So these are the ecological issues which we've got to navigate in order to reverse the crisis in nature. Next slide, please. So these are the sort of the premise really on why we have a wilder Horsham district. So the global crisis in biodiversity relates to Horsham district. And I think we sit here as, I would imagine, because of the nature of your group, people who really understand these issues. And as I said at the beginning, not necessarily understood by everybody else. The crisis in nature is something that's happening in the Amazon. It's something that's happening in the Serengeti. It's not happening here, but actually it's in mid-Sussex, it's in Horsham district. So also to ease our crisis in nature, we need to strengthen our wildlife populations. I think we do all get that. And you can take the narrative of a single species and tell the story of what does this mean for turtle doves? What does this mean for nightingales? And so to do this, we act on what we call the Lawton principles of bigger, better and more and joined up for nature, which we'll just talk about in a little while. And we need nature to thrive and to be able to move through the district. Next slide, please. So we have our Wilder Horsham district team, which is Rich on the, I'm not very good with left and right. Is that the left? Yeah, Rich on the left, Chloe on the right. Rich is our landowner advisor who's going to be talking to you shortly, and Chloe is our community support officer. And next slide, please. And the Wilder Horsham district sits on 3 strands, and they're particularly relevant because of the fact this is a partnership with a district council. So the first one is about a resilient organisation, which we'll talk about a bit more. The second one is about resilient landscape, and the third one about resilient communities. So next slide. So the resilient organisation is really important. We all have a sphere of influence, and a district council has a huge sphere of influence. So everything that it does, is it doing the right thing for nature's recovery in the district? And those of you involved in district councils know that that's a pretty big ask. So part of the Wilder Horsham district project is to look at the strategies and policies that the district council has and try and ensure that nature's recovery is embedded into them. And in the meantime, we're doing seminars and CPD for staff and for councillors as well, and really make sure that at the end of the 5 years of this project, nature's recovery is far more embedded than it was at the start of this project. Rich, I think I'm handing over to you now. Rich, are you going to pick up here? Rich, are you on mute? Rich, are you still on mute?
Yeah, I just lost my icon, so I couldn't unmute, but I found it again.
Okay,
Yes,
thanks, Rich. Over to you.
Thanks, Henri. So the second strand that Henri was talking about is landscape resilience, and as she already mentioned, that's really ties into the Lawton principles of bigger, better, more, and joined up. And what we mean by that is that you can divide the landscape into what we might call core sites. So those are sites that are already, for some reason, important for nature. So they're already recognized for their wildlife value. And you can try and make those sites bigger, typically by buffering them, as you can see here, where around the core area you've got an increased area of habitat to make sure that you haven't got a hard divide between the core habitat and the wider environment. You can make sites better by better management or by improving the quality of the habitat. And you can look to create more sites. So the brown blob at the top of this diagram represents a new site that can become a fresh core site in your landscape. And then the really important thing, as far as the nature recovery network is concerned, is joining those sites up. And that can either be through landscape corridors, so pieces of habitat that species can pass through, or through stepping stones, as shown in the middle of this little green blob here, so that you've got short jumps for different species to move across. And it's very important when you're doing that is to think about all the different kinds of species and all different kinds of habitats, because some species will move easily through woodland habitats, some will only move across open ground. So when you're building a nature recovery network, you've got to take all those different habitats and species into consideration. Just as an example, this is a slide looking at making a habitat permeable for woodland bats. So many woodland bats, like Bechstein, will only move along woodland corridors. They won't move across open landscapes. So if you have a situation like this, you can see through these red lines, follow the tree lines, and that enables the bats to move through the landscape. If you have a big open areas that they can't cross, you're effectively cutting them off from feeding or roosting areas that they might otherwise use. So really, the Wild Horsham District project is at its base, it's about trying to get out into the landscape and make real practical changes to the habitats to enable the nature recovery network to happen. And a lot of that is talking to landowners, so going out, as Henri mentioned, I'm the landowner advisor for the project, so a big part of my job will be engaging with landowners, talking to them about how to manage their land better for wildlife. And a big part of the project also will be looking at nature recovery networks, and I'm going to talk about those a bit later. And so a key thing is making sure that the habitats that we're advising the landowners about are ones that fit into the nature recovery network in an appropriate way. We do have some incentives. So we have a nature recovery award, which is a fund to contribute towards practical schemes that make links and networks in the landscape or improve habitats for wildlife. Applications are for up to £5,000 and are awarded quarterly. We had our first round in November, closed in January, and we're now into our second round. 2 projects were approved from the first round. As I said, our second round just closed, and we're about to have our panel meeting to award the funding for the second round. So if you have any community projects, have a look on our webpage, and there's an application form and guidance about the kind of projects that can apply. Of course, I haven't been able to do much landowner advice over the last couple of months because we've been in lockdown. So I spent a lot of time in front of the computer, which is not my favorite pastime, but it has been useful because, as I mentioned, one of the key things for Horsham District is devising a nature recovery network. And I'm sure you know a bit about nature recovery networks already. They are what the government is looking at as a potential mechanism for reversing the biodiversity crisis by creating more habitat and more linked habitat. So I've been spending a lot of time mapping, and here is Horsham District. And one of the key things as far as Horsham District is concerned, and a nature recovery network across the district, is it has the big advantage of having two big river systems. So you've got the Ada, which comes down through the middle of the district and then flows down the eastern side. And of course, the Arun, which flows with its tributaries across the north of the district and then comes down the western border of the district. And that's really important because wetland habitats are some of the most important habitats that we have in the UK, and wetland species are in some of the steepest decline. So wet habitats are really important. And as Henri mentioned, wet and water habitats can provide some really important functions for humans as well. So some of the things that we'll be looking at in the project are restoring natural processes, and one of those is natural flood management, whereby you're trying to hold water back in the environment. So quite a lot of the landowner advice that we'll be doing will be talking about natural flood management and natural processes. And of course, the other thing about rivers is that they're natural corridors. They're very, very easy for things to move up and down river networks. Adding into that, you can start to look at what might be your core sites in the district. So here we've got on this map, we've got our triple SIs. We've got a few of those in the district. Some local nature reserves. So there's Warnham District up here, which is run by Warnham Nature Reserve up here, which is run by Horsham District Council. We've got some of our key habitats like gill woodlands, floodplain woodlands, chalk grasslands along the downs, heathlands, and wet habitats around Pulborough and Amberley and places like that. And of course, unusually for Horsham District, not many districts can boast this, but we've got a big rewilding project right in the middle of the district at Knepp, which I'm sure many of you know. And that's really important for two reasons. One is that it shows what can be achieved through wilding, the restoration of natural processes. So Knepp, if you go back 20 years, was just a fairly unremarkable bit of Sussex farmland, but now it is quite astonishing the gains that have been made there, and it's become a major site for species that are very rare elsewhere, such as nightingale and turtle dove and purple emperor. And of course, from a district point of view, it is slap bang in the middle of the district, so it is perfectly placed nodally to be a centre of a network of a nature recovery network. Also, of course, in this map, we've got the two protected landscapes that exist within Horsham District. So the high-wheeled AONB kind of just pokes into the top corner of the district here. And of course, you've got the South Downs National Park along the southern border of the district. So that gives you the core sites, the ones that you want to make better under your Lawson principles. And to that, we can add sites that we might want to make bigger. So I mentioned that river networks are really important. And we've done quite a lot of work at the Sussex Wildlife Trust looking at habitat potential. And there's some really impressive habitat potential, particularly along the waterways, along the Ada here and along the course of the Arun here. And also some really good potential habitat restoration down here, where there's heathland potential restoration, some acid grassland and heathland potential up here, and some chalk grassland restoration potential down here. So those are certainly parts of the district that in a nature recovery network you would be looking to improve. You can also add in places where you might put in more habitat. So flagged up here are principally the AONB, the BOAs, biodiversity opportunity areas, which again are areas which have been flagged up as having particular potential for wildlife improvement. And also flagged up here in this kind of bright green are Horsham District Council's holdings, so the bits of land that they own and control, and it's very important that we are a partnership between the Trust and Horsham District Council, and they're very much on board and we're looking at we've got discussions with their Parks and Countryside team about how they can use their land holdings as part of a nature recovery network. So that gives you a pretty sound foundation for a nature recovery network. But as you can see, there are still kind of large areas of white and gaps where you don't have connectivity. So in the next bit of the project, and this is joining those things up. So this is the joined up bit of the Lawton principles. And this is where we start to get some really kind of interesting things, because whereas the bits that I've shown you up to now are in a sense fixed opportunities because of the underlying geology, or because of where the rivers are. These are much more fluid, and they're much more about where we can find kind of sympathetic landowners who we can engage with, and people who want to do this kind of work. And these ones here in the kind of turquoisey color are just indicative of where those linkages might be. And those could be corridors, they could be stepping stones, the patches of habitat. They might follow those routes that I've shown on the map. They could follow completely different ones. The key thing is trying to link up those habitats. And so that is just a rough representation of what our kind of first draft of what a Horsham District nature recovery network might look like. The next step is to turn it into reality, and to do that we're working with landowners, community groups, and despite lockdown we have started doing quite a bit of work with landowners. So I mentioned that NEP is important. This is NEP, and we are working with them on various aspects of their work. So looking at how we might spread some of the concepts of NEP beyond those boundaries, and also looking at a new project in regenerative agriculture that they're looking at, because not every landowner has to go full NEP and to go to a full rewilding thing to produce real value for wildlife. There's lots of other things you can do, and we're working with some farmers who are doing some regenerative agriculture. So this is a farm not far from NEP where they're doing mob grazing, and mob grazing is a technique where instead of using a traditional farming technique of having large numbers of animals left on a field for a very long time, here you put your animals into a very small area, but you keep them there for a very short time before you move them on again. And the advantage that has is that it is much better for the soil. And it's been shown that by doing mob grazing, you can get very good soil regeneration. And soil depletions soil depletion is one of the main problems that we have in the farm landscape today. So these kind of regenerative agriculture techniques are going to be really important, and these are the guys who are doing it. So these are some of the cattle that are on that farm doing mob grazing. And you can see they're kept in quite a small area of ground here, with just an electric fence, and they'll only be there for a day, and then they'll get moved on to another bit of land. And so what that's doing is it's just keeping the levels of cropping and poaching down to a manageable level, and it will be some time before they come back to that same bit of land again, which will give it time to recover. And that this is another of those, it's effectively attempting to restore another of those natural processes that I was talking about, because this is much more like how grazing would have been in the natural environment. If you go back to primeval times when herds were moving about on their own, this replicates what is much closer to replicating how they would have behaved. Another of those natural processes is succession, and that's something else that we'll be looking to promote during the course of the project. And indeed, we'll be getting out and effectively trying to recreate some succession ourselves by doing a bit of hands-on management. So we're hoping to develop some volunteer groups who'll go out and do, for example, a bit of coppicing in some woodlands, recreating the mosaic structures that would have occurred naturally. And we'll be going and trying to pretend to be beavers as well, and building leaky dams. And again, that's part of natural flood management, trying to hold the water back. We know that, again, NEP have a project to reintroduce beavers. but there's quite a lot you can do as a person as well. As a kid, I used to go out into the woods and build dams, and I didn't realize at the time that I was doing sound ecological work, but apparently I was. So this is the kind of thing that we might be looking to do. This is not, unfortunately, yet been produced by the Wild Horsham District Project. We haven't got that far, but this is from the Sussex Flow Initiative, which is another Sussex Wildlife Trust project. And you can see how this leaky dam, you can see the difference in the water level between upstream and downstream here in this leaky dam. And that, again, that is just holding water back in the environment. It's giving, it's preventing floods downstream. It's giving the water time to purify as well. And we'll also be looking at other habitats as well. So we've been, this is land down in Brown Brook. So we've been talking to the landowner about how he can improve his flood retention on his land. And this is a project that we've been looking at with the Ouse and the Rivers Trust. So Ouse and Ada Rivers Trust. Again, the Horsham District, Wild Horsham District is all about partnership. We're all about working with other groups and trying to add value where we can. So this is, again, the kind of thing that we might be looking to do. This is another example from the Sussex Flow Initiative. So just creating a scrape to hold water back in the landscape. I said that not all landowners are willing to go full NEP, but we hope some will, and indeed some might. So this is an estate a little bit north of NEP that is looking to do a wilding project. So there's some really exciting stuff going on in Horsham District and some real opportunities. The third strand of the three that were mentioned is community resilience, and that is about working with communities and helping communities to take action to improve their local natural environment. And this is actually a community group that we're working with in Henfield. A big part of kind of engaging with communities, of course, is the comms side, and my colleague Chloe Harrison does that. We have a web page which is on the Sussex Wildlife Trust site, so I'd definitely encourage you to go and have a look at that. We've got an entertaining blog up there by Michael Blencoe, probably more blogs up by now, and we also have a Facebook page which Chloe runs as well. I don't understand social media at all, but apparently it's really great. We've also got a thing called Instagram and Twitter. So yeah, do join up or follow or any of those things if you do use any of those platforms. So just coming back to Henfield, we are working with various community groups to look at in various places, not just Henfield, but we're working with Pulborough. We've got involved with Greening Stenning, talking to Wild About Warnham, and other groups around places like Carford. So looking to engage with communities right across the district, and again, really trying to help and encourage them to put practical change on the ground to create a nature recovery network. So we looked at mapping at a district level. You can also look at mapping at a local level. So this is Henfield Parish. And again, we're picking out the waterways here as being very important for wildlife. So you've got your primary rivers, secondary rivers and tertiary rivers, as well as lakes and culverts. And on top of that, you can map your key habitats. And so here, these are the Natural England priority habitats for Henfield Parish. You've got coastal floodplain grazing marsh down here, deciduous woodland, good quality improved grassland, a bit of lowland meadow down here, and some traditional orchards in purple. And then the next stage is trying to think about how you might join these areas up and thinking about corridors across the district, across the parish, to turn this not just into a series of habitats, but into a series of connected habitats. And that's about engaging both with landowners within the parish and with communities, and challenging communities to set targets and deliver things. So one of the things that we're talking about with many of the communities is where can they start to put in some of those missing flower meadows that are so important for bees that Henri talked about. And some communities have taken on the challenge of trying to get as many gardens as they can to put at least a metre squared of wildflower meadow into people's gardens, because there's a lot you can do as an individual. And you can drill down even further than the parish level and look, for example, at Henfield Village and think about how you can link and improve green spaces within the village itself. So can you, for example, have wild areas on the edges of your football field? Where could Action for Swifts, which is the Henfield Bird Group, look to put more swift boxes? What could you do with your road verges? Are there areas where you might look to do some tree planting, or even better, some natural succession, and let scrub return and the scrub turn to trees in the longer term? Scrub is a very much underrated habitat. So this is the kind of thing that they're thinking about in Henfield Parish. How are they going to start linking all those things together? And if we can start picking apart all these questions in each individual parish and building networks on a parish level, then all that will add up to that big nature recovery network across the whole district. So I don't know if you want to pick up any questions from the talk by Henri and I now, or if you want to do that later. But that's the end of my talk.
Thank you, Rich. I don't know, should I kind of carry on? Does that make sense? Maybe? And then we could do questions at the end. Is that, yeah? Is that, or does that work for you, Rich?
Yeah, that's fine by me, Laurie.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Would you mind? Yeah, thank you. And I'll start sharing my screen. Just bear with me, everyone. So I always do this the wrong way. I always open the presentation and then I'm like, where's the share screen thing? Right. That's it. Share. From the beginning. And then it always does that. Right, that should be the right way around now. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rich and Henri, for your talks. It was really cool to hear about the Horsham project, because it's all really exciting stuff. I'm probably going to be kind of overlapping quite a bit with what Rich and Henri have said, and then giving a few kind of, I suppose, local ideas. So effectively, this is a little bit of a rehash of a talk that I gave for HKD Transition a couple of months ago, but I have kind of changed some of it. So I'm just really going to give a few thoughts about how we could use these sort of nature recovery networks and deliver locally. So some of the thoughts and some examples, really, I think, from what we're doing locally, and a few other kind of Sussex examples as to how we can take forwards action, positive action for nature with the support of the local community. And I actually, when I was kind of thinking about this, as I was sort of, you know, shifting around slides that I gave before, I was kind of thinking, you know, what are the things, as we're kind of considering the opportunities that we have, but also the challenges, what sort of things should we be bearing in mind within our communities? And I sort of came up with these three words, actually, which I think have maybe, well, certainly two of them have been used already. I was really pleased to hear Henri sort of talking about stories. I think stories are really important, and connection is clearly very important, but also acceptance. And that's going to be my first one. And anyone that saw me do this slide before will remember I showed a picture of a coal miner and probably thought that's really weird. So this is kind of my point about acceptance. And so my grandfather was a coal miner, and I didn't know my grandfather when he was a coal miner, and I don't remember him when he was a young man. I remember him as an old man. I remember him with lines on his face, and a man who'd had a stroke, so half of his body was, you know, was not working so well. So for me, that was a shifting baseline. It's a bit of a weird example, but I think it's really important. We've heard this idea already. I think Henri mentioned shifting baseline. It's a really kind of key idea. So the landscape I see around me now, this is my normal, but it's actually hugely degraded landscape compared to the landscape that my grandfather knew when he was my age. And I think this is a really kind of key thing to be aware of. And as has been kind of mentioned already, not everyone is aware of this necessarily. We do live in a wounded landscape, and we need to acknowledge this, because I think if we don't acknowledge it, we actually risk kind of stifling our own ambition and our expectation of what we actually really need to achieve, which is a lot. And it's really important that we kind of communicate this, and the way in which we do it is really important in engaging our local communities. So I promise I will try and come on to some positive things. But we were told in 2016 that the UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, which is a fairly sort of miserable thing to hear, really. It's thought that 1 in every 10 of our species in the UK could be facing extinction. And this includes so many species that we kind of would traditionally think of as quite common and widespread. They're now kind of being classified as vulnerable and endangered. We've seen mention already about our wildflower meadows. So we've lost the overwhelming majority of our wildflower meadows, these beautiful, rich spaces that are really important for wildlife. We've lost the majority of our temperate rainforests. I mean, people don't even associate rainforest as a British thing, but we do have these beautiful temperate rainforests. They're mostly gone. And actually now, and this is more of a global thing, but I think this picture kind of maybe sums it up quite nicely. Wild mammals make up only 4% of all mammals that are walking, or still walking if you're on 4 legs, aren't you? Walking the earth today. So 4% of mammals are wild mammals, 36% of mammals are us, and 60% is our livestock. So, you know, it's fair to say we've had a pretty fundamental effect on the natural environment. And it's really hard. Like, these are hard things to hear, they're hard things to say. But like I said, I think it's really important that we acknowledge it and kind of accept where we're at, what's gone before, in order to kind of really focus in on what we need to do in terms of ecological restoration, and really making that decision to be very proactive in terms of nature recovery. So things like these nature recovery networks that you're hearing about, and it really does involve all of us. And I think, so coming on to connection, connection is clearly a very key part of what we need to do. And Rich summed that up really nicely with the more bigger, better joined up. So you can really sort of visualize what does that actually look like. And I think it's really important when we're talking about connection, especially when we're quite sort of spoilt with sites like Net, you know, fantastic, huge landscape. But it's actually really important for everyone to see that whether they themselves own a landscape, because I don't know about the rest of you, I don't own a landscape, or if they're just simply part of a landscape, landscape scale recovery is important. It's essential to all of us, and we can all have a role in it. But connection is also not just about connection for wildlife and habitat. I mean, that is critical, and these stepping stones and buffering, all of the things that Rich talked about, but it's also about connection of people. So people with nature, people with other people, and also I think critically people with information and support is a really kind of key thing. And this is where I think the stories come in. So I think stories are really central to all of this. And I think, you know, the way in which we communicate with our communities, the issues that we face, and the necessity that we have to act. So stories are the thing. I mean, I think I find this a lot in sort of doing the work that I do. Stories are the thing that really build connection between people and nature, and hopefully compel people to act. So turning things around from maybe being a sort of, oh, that's quite interesting, sort of passive thing, to actually really sort of taking an active step. So part of this is about ensuring that people have the right information. I think that's a really kind of critical thing. So making sure that, you know, when I'm working with my local community where I live, it's trying to make sure that people are taking effective action, because I think we probably all know there's nothing more disheartening than finding out that something you've been doing with really lovely intentions may actually not be the best thing. It might be sort of ineffective, or even at worst, perhaps a little bit detrimental. So I really do think that that stories are kind of a key part of this. So Rich kind of walked us through some of the sites that we've got, and we are really, really lucky to have loads of really beautiful and inspirational nature reserves. We've got restoration projects, so the rewilding project locally to us, but we don't all have, like I said, a herd of cattle or deer of our own, or the space in which they can thrive, but we can all contribute to these nature recovery networks. And I'm just going to really walk through a few ideas about what could be done locally, and a few of the things that I'm aware of, and I guess just some thoughts. And I mean, I hope it's just sort of stuff that will maybe trigger some ideas for some of you within your networks and your communities. So one of the first ones, and this is sort of, I guess, very pertinent to the fact that spring is marching upon us now, is to get rid of your lawn, which is, I mean, exactly what I say: get rid of your lawn, nurture your meadow. So Henri's already told us about this just astounding loss of species-rich grassland that we have. It basically equates to 1.5 times the size of Wales, the amount in hectares of grassland that we've lost since the 1950s. On the flip side of that, to put a slightly more positive spin on things, if we look at urban gardens, it's calculated that urban gardens account for over 520,000 hectares. I mean, that's not the size, 1.5 the size of Wales. You need to think Dorset and double it. There's still a lot of potential there. So actually, for people to see that they do have a part in this, that their garden really does play a role, is really, really key. Because if we strip it right back, everything, us, every other species, doesn't need that much. It's just food and shelter. So we can look at gardens and other sort of open spaces like road verges and churchyards and our public parks, and look at reducing cutting. It's a really kind of simple thing that can be done, but actually allowing a whole range of plants to flower, because where you have food, you have foragers. So actually, if we just relax this kind of panicky grip that we have on management of some of these sites, we can start to promote more diversity in terms of structure, so horizontal and vertical structure. And this is going to really benefit everything from bank voles to bumblebees. But again, we need to tell these stories. We need for people to understand why it's important. Why is it important that we have gradients of, we have lovely sort of open grasslands that are allowed to flower? Why is it important that we have complementary areas of scrub growing alongside? Those are the kind of stories that we need to communicate to people, and it's one of the things that we're working on at the moment in HKD. So we're talking to Plant Life about promoting their No Mow May, and they're sort of kindly sharing some of their resources. And we're also working with West Sussex County Council, and I'm sure some of you are also in your communities, because I know they're working in several different parishes around West Sussex on a project to manage some of our road verges better for wildlife, basically. So rather than kind of cutting them back relentlessly, we'll be letting them flower. We'll be doing some survey work there to see what's there, and then looking at what's sort of a better management. But a big part of this work is going to be communication. So actually telling the story of what we're doing and why, because we don't all like change. And I hope John won't mind that he's popped into my head here, but we were talking about lawns recently at a meeting, and he was saying, I won't say how many years you said, John, because I can't remember, but it is hard when you've been doing something for X number of years the same way. But hopefully, if we kind of communicate this well and take people on this journey with us, then we'll start to get some interest in it. So the next thing, and this really links into the thing about the grasslands, it's just a kind of carry on from that, is that actually we can start to see that having more flowers flowering is going to be really beneficial. And actually, if we have lots of different types of flowers, that's going to be really good. So different families, different sort of diversity of flower size and shape is going to benefit different species of pollinators and other flower visiting insects that are sort of foraging on them. So our wildflowers are really beautiful, they're really diverse, and unfortunately, there are lots of species that have got a bit of a bad reputation. So things like this ragwort. So again, we come back to our sort of stories here, because these species, so ragwort, dandelion, ivy, some of the, you know, the main sort of offenders that sometimes we really love to hate, these are fantastic species for wildlife. So again, this is something that we kind of really plan to do, is to profile some of these species and highlight their importance. So not just for pollinating insects, but things like ivy can be really good for hungry birds later in the autumn. So we're kind of all about trying to encourage people to be a little bit more ambitious. One of the things I see written a lot, and I totally understand why, but you see people writing about wildlife gardening and what you can do to help wildlife in your garden. And we're always encouraged to have a messy corner in a garden. Mess is code for nature, by the way. And that's, you know, that's a great idea, but I kind of feel almost like I want to promote, like, if you have to have a corner, can you make the corner the sort of sterile bit in an otherwise living garden? Like, you know, make the mess more inclusive. There's a lot, again, about, I think, reversing some of the conditioning that we have towards neat and tidy. So that's going to be a lot of what we're kind of working on with these sort of projects that we're doing in Hurst, and we'll keep you posted on those. And hopefully there's lots of other communities that are doing similar things. And obviously it's being championed nationally by organisations like Plant Life. So we've also got these kind of community spaces. So in Hurst Pierpoint, we've got an existing community, sorry, in HKD, we've got an existing community orchard in Ditchling, and then we've got a new community orchard that's fairly recently been planted in Hurst Pierpoint. And these spaces already are in Ditchling and hopefully will become in Hurst Pierpoint, sort of little hubs for people to come and experience and learn about wildlife. So we have, in the past, unfortunately not last year, but we have done sort of educational activities in the orchard in Ditchling, so people can come and experience the wildlife that actually can thrive in these places, and actually sort of get to meet it, get to be excited by it, get to learn about it, and hopefully also importantly start to understand some of the links between healthy nature and healthy diets as well. So there's opportunities perhaps as well around allotments, for example, as a way to make these connections with nature. So one of the other things which can be really tricky is around death and decay. So it is always very tempting as soon as a tree even sort of thinks about chucking out a bit of rotten wood to deem it dangerous and to get it down. So one of the things I'd say is that there is as much life in a dead tree as in a living one. So it would be really good if we can look for more sort of creative solutions when we're faced with these kind of senescing trees, because this is like, as a traditional adage has it, is like a third of their life, this kind of dying phase. But also there's things like compost heaps and fallen leaves and rotting wood, all of those things that we love to tidy up because they're all sort of messy. They have a really important role in providing food and shelter, but also a really critical role in returning nutrients into the soil. Rich made the really important point about our soils and how degraded, unfortunately, they have become in many instances. So the more things that we can do to actually raise awareness of that and actually give people the knowledge to how they can sort of repair soils and how we can do it within our communities, the better. So again, we've talked about sort of wetlands and how important they are. So at a sort of community level, this could be around ponds. it could be around creating new ponds, restoring existing ponds. There's lots of existing data sets out there on sort of lost ponds, also lost woodlands, lost hedgerows. So again, in Hurstpierpoint, I mean, this is not a ponds one, but we're working with the Woodland Trust on some lost woodlands. So replanting an area that the historic maps tell us used to be wooded, and we can do this sort of exercise, like I said, with ponds as well. We've got a fantastic resource in Sussex in the Biodiversity Record Centre. We can use all that existing data, much as Rich has done, to actually look at where are the opportunities, where are the priorities. We can bring all of our local knowledge together, and as has been said, wetlands are really important for so many things. So they're important for wildlife, they're really kind of important for those functioning services that they provide. They can be really good carbon sinks as well. And of course, wetland or flood management, I should say. So slowing the flow of water, storing it and releasing it more slowly. And in HKD, we've been doing some of this lovely natural flood management work. We should have just employed Rich, clearly, to get in there and make those dams for us. We'll know who to call next time. But we've been doing all sorts of sort of slowing the flow exercises on the Herring Stream, which is our sort of local watercourse. But these opportunities will exist all over Sussex, and also the expertise and the support. So as was mentioned, Sussex Wildlife Trust have got a great project that can help support. There's the Rivers Trusts, and it would be really good to see more of these local projects. So instead of looking at these very hard engineered solutions, we're looking at a much more natural approach to flood management and actually letting rivers and watercourses absorb the energy that they're receiving in rain, and creating some great habitat linkages along the way. So breaking down barriers, I mean, there are lots of barriers to break down, and quite literally, of course, our fences can be a barrier to wildlife. So of course, the kind of classic champion in that regard is the hedgehog. I'm sure you've all heard about initiatives like Hedgehog Street, and lots of communities, Hurstpierpoint included, are joining into this project. So basically trying to make gardens accessible again, so opening up little gaps in hedgerows, giving hedgehogs and lots of other creatures opportunities to move. We also need to recognise there are lots of other barriers to wildlife. So a couple that were mentioned already is loss of sort of hedgerow habitat for those commuting bats, for example. The loss of flower-rich habitats can create a big barrier for lots of sort of insects. So lots of our small solitary bees will only perhaps travel within sort of 300, 400, 500 meters. So actually it doesn't take much to put a barrier in their way. And this is where the stepping stones that Rich mentioned come in. Also areas that are lit at night. So light can be a huge barrier to a lot of wildlife, like our bats again, but also all sorts of other things. So again, these are the kind of things, these are the sort of barriers that we can look to kind of overcome. And we can all, I think, challenge ourselves to change our own perception. So the barriers we put in our own way. So instead of, you know, seeing something like this and thinking, ugh, what is that? To not see it as like some mess, but to see it as wildness. You know, this is the thing that so many of us crave. There's so many things out there that we can learn about. There's so many species that we cohabit with. There's so many really lovely sort of small everyday experiences that help us to foster connection with the natural environment and to kind of build this long-term connection with it. So I think it's something we're kind of trying to do, and I know there's lots of other communities doing a really similar thing, and Sussex Wildlife Trust have got a great their nature table on their Facebook page, is to actually try and really kind of get people amazed, to get them excited about wildlife, and then they can amaze someone else. They can share that gift. So like I said, we've got this local Facebook group where people are sort of rushing in, sharing all their sightings, asking questions about wildlife. These spaces can have a really important role for sort of exchanging knowledge, building a community as well. So as people kind of share their joy, their fascination, their appreciation for nature, it's also sort of strengthening them as a community. And I think it's a really good sort of knowledge sharing and sort of learning opportunity. And it'd be really good to kind of to sort of build on that. So it's something that we're looking at doing in Hurst Pierpoint, is to try and replicate some of the things. So Rich mentioned the community in Henfield. They've done some fantastic things. So their Birdwatch, for example, a small sort of dedicated group that's gone and got trained up together, and they now go out and do these great bird surveys. They're bringing in lots of useful data that's then going to help Rich to target the work that he's doing. So this is the sort of stuff that we're looking at doing in Hurst Pierpoint at the moment. So we're just setting up butterfly transects at the moment, and part of that will be training people. So a lot of this is about helping people to learn about wildlife, seeing that it is something that is relevant to them, it's for them, and that they can do something to help. So really hopefully empowering them, inspiring them, so that actually as a community we can sort of go forwards together and increase our impact. So I think that's kind of, I guess, yeah, like I said, I kind of, as I was sort of thinking about this, I was kind of thinking about those kind of words of acceptance, connection and stories, and I think those are kind of three really key things. And I would say it's really important that we look to find these solutions in collaboration. So I think often, you know, we kind of look to one person or one organization to be the kind of savior and to tell us what to do, and it's definitely important to seek guidance from those with experience, but actually we probably have a lot of things within our own communities. We'll have a lot of networks of skills and knowledge and experience. And it's an interesting process that we're going through in Hurst at the moment, is like, what do we have within this community? How can we use those different things? You know, we're talking about how can we work with some of the local artists in the way that we communicate some of what we're doing for wildlife. So there's lots of sort of, there's lots of resource, you know, there's lots of resource within your community for sure. And I think if we are clever about the way in which we share information and support each other, maintain our kind of networks and grow them, we can really sort of come together and deliver these nature recovery networks. So yeah, I mean, that was just really, like I said, it's just some thoughts about some of the things that we're doing, some of the things that perhaps could be done. It's not, I don't have all the answers, I just have thoughts. But I hope that that was useful and gave you some things to think about, because that's what we need most, is hope. And yeah, that is the end of my talk. So let me just stop sharing. And I don't know if anyone has got any questions that they wanted to ask Henri or Rich or myself, or anything they would like to contribute to the discussion. Juliet, was there anything you saw in the chat as I was talking that was a...
Well, I asked a question and Henri gave a long answer, but maybe you'd like to say, rather than us reading it, Henri, you could actually say it. About district council. And,
okay, thanks, Laurie. That was a fantastic presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Brilliant. I'm all inspired. And I want to join whatever that Facebook group is that you were talking about. Anyway,
it's a mini version of the lovely Sussex Nature Table one. So
well, brilliant,
we were inspired by you guys.
Well, I'm signing up. So anyway, the question was, are there things the district council can do in relation to the huge new housing developments to make them less damaging barriers to wildlife travel? What's Horsham DC thinking about? So our work with Horsham District Council comes at a remarkably inconvenient time for Horsham District Council, but because they're in the middle of their local plan consultation. So it is really difficult for them to have already promoted in their first consultation the large scale allocations without having put on a map what their nature recovery network is. So we're all waiting now for the next stage of the consultation, and we all hope that they would have been listening to the work of the Wilder Horsham District project, which is, you know, their project, to see how they're going to balance the nature recovery network and their local plan process. However, putting the local plan process to one side, I think the most important thing that a local authority needs to do is to have really robust policies within its local plan. When it goes through its local plan process, it needs to have its evidence base. I think this is where Horsham, if they could go back in time, might change the timetables around a little bit, but to have that evidence base in order to make the judgments, because those of you involved in the district council will know how a developer will present something that maybe could be the answer to your housing numbers, but is everybody's saying this is devastating for wildlife or devastating for local communities. And if you've got your evidence base already in place of what your vision is as a district council, you're in such a a stronger position to defend your nature recovery network. If you don't have a nature recovery network, you can't defend it. So have your vision and make sure that vision is penetrated through every single level of the local authority. So in Wilder Horsham District, I guess this is why we have this resilient organisation piece, where the councillors need to be absolutely signed up for this. And with them, all of the different departments need to be signed up for this, because it can't just be a planning department that are kind of the lead agency within a local council for nature's recovery. It needs to be throughout the whole system. I don't want to go on anymore, or I will be ranting.
There's a new question, and I don't know if it's for Laurie or for you, Henri. Have we an exemplar of local plan policy for nature recovery networks and biodiversity net gain?
Laurie might have some stuff to say about that. I think there's some good stuff coming out of Surrey on biodiversity net gain, where we're watching very closely. I think in Sussex, I don't think any of the local authorities have really got their heads around what biodiversity net gain should be and looks like, and we need to all work together to make sure everybody has what they need in order to deliver biodiversity net gain. And in terms of best practice for nature recovery networks, I think we're still waiting to see it. This still isn't enshrined in law. We're all waiting for the environment bill that's been postponed 3 times now. And the nature recovery networks will become mandatory in this process. So I'd say to every local authority, give yourself a head start and start thinking about this now, because it's going to be very difficult to deliver your biodiversity net gain if you don't have anywhere to have any kind of idea where to put your off-site gain, because I think we all know that not all gain is going to be able to be accommodated on site. So what are you going to do with your off-site gain? Where are you going to put it? Where is the most important place within your community, within your neighbourhood, within your district? I expect Laurie's got some more thoughts on that.
I don't think I've got that much to add, and I probably can't add anything useful in terms of the policy. I guess one of the things that's important to kind of just point out is that it is about gain. So it's additionality. It's not kind of saying it, you know, it's not just about nature reserves and things like that. This is more like what else can we do? So that's a kind of a really key thing, and it will be, I mean, yeah, it's incredibly frustrating to see the legislation delayed again. It will be very interesting to see this all as it progresses. We just lost Henri.
No, I'm here.
Oh no, you're there. Someone moved and you've shot down
All right.
to a different place. So
there's a question about what's off-site gain. Do you want to explain that, Laurie?
I mean, so this is basically saying, so if you're doing a development, for example, you kind of go through a process of firstly, can I avoid environmental damage? If you can't avoid it, can I mitigate it? So that will be about, you know, it could be changing methods, it could be changing timings, and then you should be always looking for, okay, now what can I do to enhance, and then what can I do to compensate? And like I said, the kind of net gain is that's the kind of key thing. It's not you should have a better situation than when you started, which is tricky. And it will be interesting to see how, you know, it's a difficult thing to deliver alongside a very big demand on housing, as Henri identified.
So the forthcoming Environment Bill will establish a percentage of biodiversity net gain that every development should have. If you can't deliver that gain on site, you do as much as you can on site, and it's all measured with terribly complicated metrics for how you measure it. And if you can't do it on site, then you have to do it off site. So from a local conservation perspective, you want that to be as close to where the loss is as possible, so that it's relevant to that local loss. There's Surrey County Council, for example, is saying 20% biodiversity net gain. Different areas are saying different figures. I think in Sussex we're going to be encouraging at least 20% biodiversity net gain. So let's say you lose 10% of you lose 10 units of biodiversity as a result of the development, then you've got to make sure that you've got 12 units put back in.
There's also a potential complication in terms of what is lost and what is gained, because you could have a situation, if it's not properly regulated, where a developer could be destroying a particularly rare and precious habitat and one that's hard to recreate, and then saying, oh, we're putting in 12 units of this much easier habitat. So losing, say, for example, wet heathland, and then trying to replace it with dry grassland or something like that. So there is a qualitative as well as a quantitative consideration that has to be taken into account in net gain.
We've got a couple more questions. One about what types of partnership with the district council would you recommend? And the other from me, because we've got a number of people who are in parish councils or community groups, where would you suggest that, but not in a district council, where would you suggest that we start? Is it with mapping or is it with something else? I think there may be another.
Shall I start with that first question about types of partnership, and then Laurie and Rich will have lots to say about the second part of the question. So in terms of types of partnership, I'll just briefly say what happened with Horsham District Council. Was the deputy leader was incredibly passionate about wanting to do something for wildlife in the district, but realizing that that's a lot easier said than done. And so we spent a bit of time talking about their needs as a district, what the potential blocks were to working on something really ambitious, which could be, for example, that not all the councillors are on board that we even have ecological emergency that's relevant to the district, let alone a climate emergency. And so making sure it was a process of making sure everybody was on board step by step and go, right, we want to do something about this. And then we created a proposal of like, well, this is what we would recommend in order to, you don't want to do anything like 3-year projects, people, is a kind of popular time frame. You can't do enough in 3 years. And so there was like, well, it has to be 5 years minimum. There has to be core funds to be granted to community groups or landowners to actually make stuff happen, because otherwise you're at risk of spending 5 years talking to people and nothing actually happening. You need to start things off. So I mean, I guess that's all I can say. If any of your district councillors want to talk to us about our experience of working with Horsham, or talk to Horsham District Council about their experience of working with us, we'd be more than happy. I think Laurie and Rich, the second bit's for you. About where do you suggest we start and think about nature recovery networks at a parish or community level?
Do you want to start, Rich, or shall I?
Yeah, I can do. So there's a lot to be said for mapping. I guess one thing to say is to make sure that you're not reinventing the wheel. So one thing that's definitely worth considering is Laurie mentioned the Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre, and they have a sort of a mapping service where you can fill out an application form and get them to send you a mapping report and a species report for your parish. So if you're working on a parish level, that I'd say that would be a really good place to start. And if you want to kind of enhance on that, you could start thinking about how you might map the links, the missing links between the habitats that you have. Another thing potentially you could do is doing some ground truthing, kind of checking that what the data that is in the record centre is still accurate. But I mean, one of the things that we've been suggesting to community groups is to kind of set some targets, and the kind of things we've been talking about are Laurie already mentioned turning gardens, or at least part of your garden, into a wildflower meadow or a native grassland. Think about kind of maybe where you might put up bat boxes, or where you might plant things like alder buckthorn, or where you might put in hedgerows. So try and set some targets for your parish, of things that you might reasonably achieve. You know, have you got some good connections with a local landowner who might be interested in making his own wildflower, his or her own wildflower meadow, and those kind of things.
Yeah, I think the data as well that Rich has mentioned can be really important in terms of prioritizing what you might do. So so Rich used the example of the swifts in Henfield. So you know, if you know that there's a particular species there that you could make positive action and positive change for, then that can be a really good way to focus your efforts. And then also I think you know, getting people involved as much as possible in some of the monitoring. So that's, like I said, what we're sort of trying to do here. So in tandem with a project that over time will hopefully be restoring some meadows in Hurstpierpoint, actually getting people involved in the process of monitoring them. So going out and surveying the butterflies, so carrying out these transect surveys, they're called. Hopefully that's going to have lots of kind of advantages. We're obviously getting the data, which is great, but people are kind of understanding the importance of the site, and hopefully as it improves botanically over time, hopefully we'll start to see that reflected in the numbers and the species of butterflies that we're seeing. And also it's building up kind of ownership within the community. I mean, a really lovely thing, that it's a small thing, but a really lovely thing that happened in this summer, we had skylarks breeding in that meadow, and we put up some notices, and I saw it was really good. People responded really well to it in terms of keeping dogs on leads and things, because actually when they understood what the issue was, and you know, the whole kind of ethos behind the notice was, this is amazing, like these are special birds, they're red listed birds, aren't we lucky to have them here? And I even saw a lady telling off someone else because they were going into the long grass, which I was like, yes, saved me a job. But you know, it's like I said, I think it goes back to those stories as well. So I don't know if that helps, Juliet, with but definitely mapping. I wholeheartedly agree with Rich. Like mapping is the good first step.
There are other sort of species surveys you can get involved in as well. So the ancient tree inventory is a good one. So the Woodland Trust has an ancient tree inventory on its website, and ancient trees and veteran trees are severely under-recorded in the county. So if you look at a map of the ancient trees that are recorded in the county, NEP gets really strongly picked out, and that's not necessarily because it has many more ancient trees. It's just they're really well mapped there. So that's something that's easy to do, and because there is a system and it's on the website, it's very easy for that data then to get to the record center. And bird recording through things like Bird Track, or on apps like iSpot, iRecord rather. Which one is which?
iRecord.
iRecord, yeah. iSpot's, it's kind of redundant now, iSpot, isn't it?
I don't know.
Yeah, iRecord, yeah. So which is really easy, kind of, if you use a smartphone, it's really easy to just record things as you go along, and that you record it. It gets into the record center eventually, and you can use it for your local community stuff as well.
We've got one more question from a district councillor from Mid Sussex. Do you think that Horsham District Council is a good example to follow? Or are there other authorities that you would suggest we look at?
I'm going to say yes, I do think the Horsham district is a good example to follow. They've put their money where their mouth is, which they've made a really significant commitment. And I don't know any other district that's done anything like that in the southeast at present. There's some great stuff coming out of districts at the moment, and Ada and Worthing have got a different sort of approach, and they've been purchasing pieces of land and looking at how to regenerate those areas of land. I think that the Horsham approach is really strong because it will penetrate the organisation really strongly. So it has a real sense of permanence, I think, about changing that organisation from the inside, as well as whatever activity Rich and others can achieve over the 5-year period.
I think as well it ties in really well to the way things are going in terms of government, and where Natural England and DEFRA are looking at nature recovery networks, and it's very likely that things like the new land environment management scheme will be linked to those kind of things. So in that sense, there's a strong argument that Horsham might well be getting a jump on some of this stuff, that they're ahead of the game.
That's great. Are there any more questions? Because we're almost at the end of our time. So now is the moment, if you were sitting on a question, want to raise it, put it in the chat right now. While we're thinking about that, can I just say, anybody who is not on the Central Sussex Climate Network mailing list, that is, you didn't find out about this meeting through an email from me, and you would like to find out about future events, you can just send an email, and I've put it in the chat room, info@hkdtransition.org.uk, and I'm happy to add you to the list. If you have ideas about future meetings that you would like to see, or future actions that we could work on together, we would very much like to hear from you. In the absence of any more questions, I think we can wrap it up, and to say thank you for 3 great, inspiring speakers. There's lots of positive comments in the chat about how good it's been this evening, and I hope everyone has really enjoyed it and takes away some things that we can all start working on locally. So thank you, Henri, Rich, and Laurie. And
thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you.